In the past few weeks, a new game has taken the internet by storm, and I've been caught up in the enthusiasm. Trench Crusade is a grim and gritty wargame set in an alternate timeline where a portal to hell was opened on Earth in the year 1099, and in the ensuing centuries, mankind has fought against the legions of hell in a brutal and never-ending war. The year is now 1914, and the blasted wastelands left by a near millennium of endless conflict are crisscrossed with trenches and fortifications. But beyond the amazing world, the creators of Trench Crusade have created something truly special, a framework and culture that enables and encourages the creative energies of the community. So in this video, I'm digging into the limitless possibilities of Trench Crusade. Trench Crusade is the vision of an all-star cast of experienced industry experts. The concept is created by Mike Francina, an incredibly talented artist who's done work for some of the world's biggest fantasy properties. Thomas Pirinen, the rules writer for the game, is a near-mythical figure in the wargames community, having written rules for the cult classic Mordheim, as well as the greatest edition of Warhammer Fantasy. Also on the team is James Sheriff, a veteran sculptor who has a long resume of sculpting some of the world's best miniatures. Full disclosure, this game will not be for everybody. It contains a huge amount of religious imagery and themes, and real-world faiths, albeit in an imagined alternate history, are at the forefront. It's also incredibly grim and dark, with horrifying themes and concepts that aren't for the faint of heart. If you're put off by any of these things, this game is probably not for you. I'll admit that I was initially a bit put off by all the religious imagery myself. I'm not interested in mocking or disrespecting anyone's beliefs just for the sake of it. But the more I dug into the setting, the more I began to view Trench Crusade as I would like any other piece of art that deals with faith and blasphemy. Heavy metal music and horror movies are constantly playing with these themes because I think there's something universally fascinating about the dark side of human nature and the ways in which our belief systems and institutions can amplify those dark aspects. But just like you don't have to be a Satanist to enjoy watching a movie like The Exorcist, I think it's possible to enjoy playing in the fantastic world of an alternate history of World War I without feeling like you're expressing any sort of critique of anyone's beliefs or espousing any particular worldview. At least that's how I feel about it. But just to be crystal clear, no disrespect to anybody's culture or faith is intended by me in this video. In the world of Trench Crusade, the Abrahamic God and the demons of hell intervene in tangible ways, often and with great effect. And powerful supernatural forces have affected the development of civilization and warfare as much, if not more than, scientific research has. With the timeline diverging from our real world during the period of the Crusades, the aesthetic is a blend of medieval imagery and technology combined with the horror and industrialized brutality of the First World War. Soldiers in holy plate carry machine guns, dark witches hurl artillery shells with telekinetic force, and literal demons traverse the battlefield. With nearly a millennium of divergence from our real world with earth-shattering supernatural occurrences happening regularly, the world of Trench Crusade has an exciting blend of fantasy and historical influences, but ultimately provides a gigantic sandbox for players to imagine and create their own stories and creations. As many of you know, in previous videos I built a large-scale trench board for wargames, and while Trench Crusade was not on my radar at the time I started that project, a ton of people were encouraging me to look into it. As I'm a well-documented enjoyer of knights in the medieval period with a keen interest in military history as well, it seemed like an obvious fit. It also seemed pretty easy to get into the game. Trench Crusade's a skirmish game, which means you have to field as few as 6 models to get started, and the official playtest rules are free to download online. With the official Kickstarter making waves in the community, I began to be drawn into some of the gorgeous miniatures I was seeing on display. There was only one problem. At the time I started to get the urge to make a warband, the official miniatures were not yet released. But here's one of the things that makes Trench Crusade so cool. It's miniatures agnostic, meaning you can use any models you like. They encourage you to make your own models, use existing models you already have, or kit bash and convert third-party kits. And they even encourage other miniature makers to make Trench Crusade compatible models, offering a tiered licensing system to make them officially sanctioned. This means that the creative freedom you're given is practically endless. I couldn't wait for the official models, so I found some made by a smaller creator and printed them off. At this point, I was just dipping my toe in, and I thought I would enjoy painting some soldiers with knight helmets and machine guns. And yeah, I mean, this is awesome. Now, in the real world, plate armor will not stop bullets, and this sort of armor became obsolete around the end of the 17th century as black powder weapons became more widespread on the battlefield. As a bit of a stickler, I started to look into the lore and found out that there is a logical explanation for why in the world of Trench Crusade, medieval armor seemingly coexists on a 20th century battlefield. The divine forces at play allow for the creation of incredibly strong alloys that will make plate armor capable of stopping bullets. Now this is the exact sort of attention to detail that adds believability to a setting like this, and I love that sort of thing. At this point I began to dig into the lore in earnest, and I learned about the different official factions. Let's take a look. The Principality of New Antioch, a defiant bastion of the faithful against the gates of hell. The Trench Pilgrims, an inexorable tide of zealots and prophets. The Heretic Legion, militant forces of humans who have knelt to hell's powers. The Cult of the Black Grail, who seek to cover the world in a pestilence that abhors all life. The Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent. The minions of the Archdevils who represent the seven deadly sins. And the one that captured my imagination most, the Iron Sultanate. Behind the divinely manifested iron wall of Dual Karnine, the Sultan's armies defend their lands against the tides of infidels and heretics. Harnessing the power of esoteric alchemical knowledge, the Sultan's armies deploy massive batteries of artillery and sharpshooters. To hold back the armies of hell, the Sultan sends forth elite janissaries and deadly assassins, as well as terrifying Taquin creations, synthetic terrors created in the laboratories of the Alchemists. Right away, I was drawn to the Iron Sultanate. It seemed immediately obvious to me that this faction provided an incredible opportunity to explore the aesthetics of the so-called Islamic Golden Age, an era of scientific, economic, and cultural flourishing. In my opinion, this fascinating period of history is underrepresented in modern fantasy. So as I mentioned, at the time I started this project, the official files for the Iron Sultanate were not yet released. So I decided to make my own, and I did so using a method that's been a game changer for me: digital kit bashing. Let me show you what I've done. First up, the rank and file troops of the Iron Sultanate are called Azebs. These are soldiers recruited from the many provinces of the Sultanate who specialize in sharpshooting and hit-and-run tactics. The official models have an incredible aesthetic to them. The gas masks, the head wrappings, and the color palette in the official art are all just wonderful. For the basis of my conversions, I decided to use models from Sean Sutter's Sludge wargame, as the Keth faction has many lightly equipped troops with head wrappings who will look at home in the Trench Crusade setting. To add a little bit more of the World War I aesthetic, I bashed on a gas mask that I found on Cults 3D using a program called Mesh Mixer. I've hardly any prior experience with this program, but it's wonderfully simple. You just import the files, then align the pieces the way you want them, and then join the files and export it as an XTL. It's pretty much foolproof. I 3D printed a handful of these Azebs and gave them a quick coat of paint. It was at this point that I realized that I'm totally hooked. This took only a few hours in total, and I have some unique miniatures for my very own Sultanate force. Hell yeah. Next up, I decided to make a Yuzbazi captain, the obligatory leader of my gang. I'm a Patreon supporter of someone called Wilf from Diverging Realm, who's an incredibly talented sculptor, and I believe one of the official sculptors for the game as well. I found this really cool body they'd made, and using a head from Keth in the same gas mask, I quickly bashed together a leader for my gang. I'm a huge fan of the way that a black head wrapping and all black outfit looks. I took a bit of inspiration from the character of Salahuddin from Kingdom of Heaven for this one. I've done a very simple paint job, picking out black and metallic bits, and who knows, I might refine this in the future, but I'm hesitant to add more colors as the monochromatic appearance just looks so awesome in my opinion. Because it's a digital kit bash and I've invested so little time in the painting so far, I might even make some digital alterations and just print a new one. I don't know. It's incredible to have that kind of freedom. Now, during the Islamic Golden Age, scholars from all over the Muslim world flocked to the University of Baghdad, then the largest city in the world, where intellectualism thrived under the patronage of the Muslim rulers. Scientific and philosophic works from China, India, ancient Greece, and all over the ancient world were translated, copied, and made widely available, preserving hundreds of texts and bodies of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever. From this era came an explosion in advancements in astronomy, mathematics, navigation, medicine, architecture, and art, and perhaps most interestingly, the foundation for the modern methods of scientific research were laid by a group intent on unlocking the mysteries of the physical world. The Alchemists. This is perhaps my favorite thing about this setting. Mysterious and esoteric beliefs and ideas from the medieval period are manifested literally. All of the things that the alchemists of real-world history were trying to achieve
are possible in the world of Trench Crusade, and as such, the Alchemists play an important role in the Iron Sultanate. Of course, I knew I needed to make my own.
I started by simply searching for an existing model of an Alchemist online, and someone in the Trench Crusade Discord, which is an incredible community by the way, pointed me toward this one on Cults 3D. I wanted to add some extra details and change its loadout, so I pulled it in a mesh mixer and got to work. The first thing that I did was pull in a head from the sludge range again. I thought the big turban would improve the silhouette and give him an air of authority. Watch how simple this is. I just lay the face over the existing face and damn, that already looks pretty good. I attempted to blend in the larger mustache a bit with the sculpting tools and mesh mixer, and I can't tell if they're badly suited to this purpose or if I just have no idea what I'm doing. It could be a bit of both, but I got a decent result eventually. Next I pulled in this other model of an Alchemist into mesh mixer as well, also from Cults, and cut off his arm using the plane cut tool. I then rotated the arm to the angle I wanted and positioned it coming out of his left sleeve. So far so good. Now the model comes with a hand holding a staff, but I wanted my guy to have a halberd gun, one of the special weapons that the Iron Sultanate can take. I cut off the staff, then brought in a 3D model of a halberd that I'd found, using Mesh Mixer's native tools to add a long cylinder shape to fatten up the haft of the weapon. This will make it more durable for printing and cover some of the remnants of the old staff. I also found this model of a World War I machine gun, so I brought that in and placed it on the head of the halberd in a place that I thought looked decent. I added another little cylinder to continue a decorative element across the muzzle of the gun part, which I think makes the whole weapon look a little bit more cohesive. I then brought that in and put it on my guy. I'm starting to like where this is going. To give the Alchemist a bit more armor, I added some shoulder pauldrons echoing the design of the official Adhesive art. As a bit of armor for his back, I repurposed a token that a creator named Mr. Jar had made for the Iron Sultanate, as I loved the intricate design. As it turns out, the design is based on a real ancient coin, so my guy's got a giant coin on his back. I think it looks sweet though, so I'm into it. I printed it up, and while taking the supports off, I accidentally ripped off the point of his halberd, but rather than print it again, I decided to fix it with a bit of styrene rod, making a more prominent barrel instead, which I think looks fine. I mean, why stab somebody when you can shoot a burst of alchemical rounds, am I right? As I started to put some paint on it, I decided to take inspiration for his color scheme from a character that I always kinda liked as a kid. I make an attempt at doing a liquid effect on some of his glasswork, and boom. Let me introduce you to Ibn al-Jafari, my lead alchemist.
Alchemy is a fascinating historical rabbit hole to go down. Perhaps the most prolific alchemist is the mysterious 9th century alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan, who's credited with writing over 600 texts, not just on alchemy, but cosmology, astronomy and astrology, medicine, pharmacology, zoology, botany, metaphysics, logic, and even grammar. It's unclear if Jabir, whose name was Latinized in later translations as Jabir, was even a real person. There is clear evidence that as late as the 13th century, an anonymous writer in Europe was publishing alchemical texts under his name. Nonetheless, Jabir ibn Hayyan is credited with many contributions to modern science, including introducing methods for distillation, crystallization, and filtration of chemicals that are still used today, and he's sometimes called the father of modern chemistry. However, while alchemy in many ways resembled a precursor to modern chemistry, the practice also encompassed mysterious and esoteric pursuits such as the transmutation of lesser metals into gold. But many alchemists were consumed with the pursuit of taquin, the creation of artificial life. Attempting to research alchemy is incredibly difficult, as there are so many wild and conflicting sources. It's inextricably linked with mysticism, symbology, and a fair bit of total nonsense as well. It's a fascinating subject and one that I've just begun to dive into, but I'm certainly a long way from feeling like I have a good grasp on it. Take a look at this woodcut portrait of Jabir ibn Hayyan, where he's pictured anachronistically wearing Elizabethan clothes. In it, he's joined by a lion, which likely has some symbolic significance that I don't yet fully understand, and perhaps I never will. But suffice to say, this idea has been adapted in its most literal and bombastic sense in the world of Trench Crusade, where alchemists have managed to use the practice of taquin to create terrifying creatures to pit against their enemies.
And one such of these creations are the horrifying Lions of Jabir. It's said that when the Sultan himself deigns to go into battle, he's accompanied by 77 of these monstrosities. Looking at the concept art for these creatures, you can see an evolution in the idea from something leonine to something more humanoid and terrifying. And indeed, according to the lore, the lions take many shapes and forms depending on the alchemical conditions of their creation. So I decided to make my own. I found this model called an Ape Fiend, made by Artisans Guild. I decided mine should have a somewhat simian form, loping forward on its knuckles like the official one, and I began to add some medallions on him to tie it in with the official design. I didn't really feel like covering him with symbols and sigils that I didn't understand, so I ended up using an antique coin and some shields. I also added a cat-like mask, which I think gives the model a really great contrast between the calm and ornate visage of the cat and the wild and ferocious beast underneath. I actually ended up giving him a Viking Wayfarer's talisman on one shoulder as well, which doesn't exactly fit the lore, but it does look pretty cool. I printed him and painted him up with a pale skin tone with a purplish undertone, then picked out the metallic areas in bright gold. I painted his hair a deep black, making a nice contrast, and washed a thin black over the areas that had a visible fur texture in an attempt to create a bit of a transition. Then I tied things together with some more washes of dark tone and strong tone. Now, I usually don't put blood on my models, but in this case the concept art is just so incredibly brutal looking, I knew I had to do it. I started by sparingly applying some red wash, and then eventually I used dry blood effect and just went way overboard with it. The end result is just absolutely brutal. Can you imagine this thing bounding towards you? That's the stuff of nightmares. Now, as I was working on these projects, the Kickstarter for Trench Crusade was fulfilled, and I was able to get access to some of the official models as well. I painted up the Sapper, the official Alchemist model, an official line of Jabir, and some of the official Azebs as well. Whenever I get into a new game, I make sure to magnetize my models, which makes them really easy to store and transport. The magnets I use are from the sponsor of this video, the Magnet Baron. The Magnet Baron makes a large variety of powerful high-quality magnets in a wide range of sizes. The website is really easy to use for wargamers as it's sorted into a bunch of common use cases. So visit themagnetbaron.com and stock up today. Thanks Magnet Baron for sponsoring this video. I have more than enough models to play the game now, but I'm just getting started. I also started building a force of Heretic Legion as well, but I'll save that topic for another video.
In addition, I've started building some terrain pieces to complement my Iron Sultanate force, which I'm really excited to show you guys in a future video as well. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. I want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons for their continued support, and if you want to support the work I do, joining my Patreon is a great way. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.